Hi, Becca. Thank you so much for sharing your story. I just watched it a couple of times and I realized I just felt gratitude for hearing your story. And then, of course, then I'm like, gratitude. And then I feel kind of bad about that. And then I'm like, this is a horribly sad story. And the sadness and the waves of that come back. And then I feel like, but I'm also sort of in my happy zone when I'm hearing stillbirth stories. And don't get me wrong, obviously it's tragic you losing Elijah, but I also feel like in my grief journey at this point, I feel such comfort in just hearing stories and people willing to share. And I don't know exactly why, but I find great comfort in that. And sometimes I joke with David or with my friends, is like grief group is the happiest part of my week. And I don't know what that says about my grief journey or grief in general, but it's almost like where I want to be. And before losing my Elijah, that would have just seemed like the most horrible, unimaginable place to be in life, and yet that's where I want to be, is kind of at sharing stories and hearing other people's experiences and their journeys, and I learned so much, and so thank you for sharing. There were so many things too where I just thought, oh, that's just like our story. But then the things that were not like our story, I thought, oh, I really want to hear more about that. I cannot imagine the taxi ride after, not, it was you said before the final diagnosis of IUFD, stillbirth, but there were concerns that the midwife couldn't find a heartbeat. I cannot imagine like jumping into a car with a stranger. I wondered, like, did you talk to the cab driver at all? Like, people going to the hospital obviously have medical concerns, but I don't know, was there a conversation there, or were you trying to be friendly, or you just were like, don't talk to me? I wondered that. Yeah. But then the similarity of like, both of our sons were off at camp, and so our oldest, Timothy, he was 7 at the time. He was off at summer camp, and I remember thinking this is the perfect time for a baby to be born, because we're down one kid. We have 3 living children. Their ages right now they are 8, almost 6, and 3.5. But we lost our Elijah 9 months ago, so they were a little younger then. Yeah, I remember thinking when I heard your story, wow, we should all have like a really good pathologist friend who like cares, because right, I wanted that combination so badly of like an expert who cared, and so I was like, how can we all just have this magical pathologist friend who can like answer all of our questions? And it made me wonder too with the small placenta. Was she able to specifically figure out point you know 0.01 percentile? Or did she have a chart that shows that? I've been trying to find this magical chart so I can look up, like, myself, Dr. Kliman, the pathologist at Yale who helped us figure out that our Elijah had a really small placenta. He has that chart, and I just haven't gotten it from him yet. So I'm curious if your friend has that magical chart and would be willing to share it with me. I would like to see it. Um, um, Yeah, so I was really glad you had that friend who's willing and able to help you both. Um, oh gosh, I wondered what it must be like to be a doula in that circumstance. And I thought too, so like both of us came a little bit from these backgrounds of like, we not should have, that's not the right word, but we're coming from a little bit of a background where we know something about labor and delivery. You were a doula, and I've had 3 living children prior to this, and I've had 2 friends who have gone through stillbirth and who shared their stories with me, and I sort of walked this road with them as a friend 2 years ago, and then about 8 years ago. So it's like we're kind of in this world of babies, and we know that outcomes can be bad, and yet it still caught us both by surprise, and just kind of the surrealness of I don't know, it was just a thought going through my brain of that. And I wanted to know more about being a doula and how that did or didn't impact your labor and delivery, and then also being a doula after you lost your Elijah, what that might have been like. I think I remember on our phone calls you said you have attended a labor and delivery after losing your Elijah, and I just was wondering if you could just share a little bit more about that. I cannot imagine. Like, it's hard enough for me to like see babies and see pregnant people, but for me to like attend a labor and delivery of a live baby, I could not do that right now. Yeah. Oh, I remember the feeling too of wanting to opt out and like not wanting to go there. You said you didn't want to go home where the labor tub was, which I was like, heck yeah, I wouldn't want to do that either. And just like trying to avoid even basic things like home, or like all the places where we had put Elijah's stuff, or the park that we went to when Elijah was still alive the day before we found out he had died, and just all these things. Like, life became this like avoidance, like, how can I avoid this, and how can I avoid this, and how can I avoid this, until I was ready to tackle them. And like, some of those things I have tackled now, and I've sort of conquered those fears, and other things I'm like, nope, not there yet. So yeah, I'm trying to think what else. Oh, I was going to ask you, your pathologist friend, going back to her, did she also calculate the fetal placental ratio of like the weight of your Elijah divided by the weight of his placenta? And I'm curious what that was. I remember Dr. Kliman on the podcast saying that ratio is really important, and like anywhere 9 to 1, 10 to 1 is like not good. 6 to 1 is a normal fetal placental ratio. Anyway, I'm curious what yours was for your Elijah. Yeah, I could keep asking you questions forever. But you asked me about mailing the placenta to Yale, and yeah, no, we didn't keep it. This was all bundles of interestingness that I learned after losing Elijah. So we did opt for the full autopsy, like I said, but his body was cremated after the autopsy. So when I heard Dr. Kliman in his report on this podcast, my like life-changing podcast in my life, he said, yeah, if you want us to look at your materials, just send everything to Yale. And I was like, I don't know what still exists. How do I even find that out? And he said, well, just call the pathology department of the hospital where the autopsy was done and just see what they have available, see what they preserved. And I was like, well, probably nothing, right? Why would you save anything? Now, at that point, it had been over 3 months. So I just thought, well, it's not going to be much. But I called them. And first of all, it took like 2 days of angst and stress to be like, how do you make that phone call to the pathology department? Hi, my baby died and I want to see you preserved. I mean, that rolled off my tongue right there, but that just totally repulsed me, the thought of calling somebody and saying that. But I don't know, my curiosity and my desire to know what happened, I guess, overcame that horror. And they were very kind on the phone. They were responsive and they were very helpful. After some digging, found out there were quite a few things that had just been preserved in the basement of the hospital where the autopsy was done. Standard procedure for every stillbirth, they preserve the placenta in some sort of liquid preservative, and it just sits there for a minimum of a year, they said, for every stillborn baby who has an autopsy. Placenta automatically saved for a year. It made me very thankful to the families or people who went before us, that somebody probably someday, who knows how long ago, advocated for that to happen, and I was the beneficiary of that. Anyway, so his whole placenta had been saved and was still at the hospital. And then they also saved like tissue samples, which they preserve in like a paraffin wax. And then they had also preserved slides or tissues, a part of his body, before it was sent, to the funeral home where we saw him, and then to the before he was cremated. So, and I didn't know that any of this had happened. I had no clue. I had nothing to do with that preservation. And even when we saw him at the funeral home, I didn't notice that they had saved sections of any of his tissues. So they did it in a very respectful way. So that's what they had, and so I just said, can you please mail that to Yale? Now, how do you mail placentas? I didn't know that either, but there are ways, and the hospital paid for all of that. They really took care of it. I just had to like do the coordinating of like calling Yale and say, hey, watch out, my baby's placenta is going to be arriving on Wednesday. Please be aware and alert so that somebody can, gather it right away and put it where it needs to be and be on the lookout for it. So yeah, it was just sent express overnight priority mail or something in October, November, somewhere in there. November. Yeah, so that was mailing the placenta to Yale. I thought it was interesting that you have a picture of your Elijah's placenta. I would love to have a picture of my Elijah's placenta. And I'm hoping to get that from Dr. Kliman, if I can bother him for that. Yeah, so I still have never seen his placenta. I never looked at it after he was born. I didn't care. Wasn't a thing. Placenta sizes wasn't on my radar then. And yeah, it was just sent directly from the hospital to Yale. So that's the placenta story. I'm super curious to learn about the appointments that you've had with people. Have you already had some now, or are they up and coming? And I'm very curious to hear what their response is, or how you feel like it went, if they were receptive, if they were not. And I haven't had any in-person meetings with people, but I've emailed with a number of care providers, and just the response has been all across the board. But I know, like, the U.S. healthcare system is so different from Canada that I wonder if maybe, I don't know, maybe it'll be better for you. So yeah, I'd love to hear any and all of that you're willing to share. I feel like I've asked you about 1,000 questions now, so I should probably slow down. But yeah, thank you for sharing your story. I'm glad we're doing this project, and I feel like I don't really know how to get people to start caring about placenta volumes, but let's try YouTube videos and see what happens. Talk to you later, Becca. Bye-bye.